Debbie Gibson is often lumped into the mold of 80s teen pop stars, and I think that she definitely was that, but that might be a little bit unfair. I think she was so much more than that. She was truly a musical icon, and she was able to successfully reinvent herself in ways that those other pop stars just couldn't. She controlled her sound and her style in ways that was kind of revolutionary for the time. So, this is the story of Debbie Gibson. If you end up enjoying this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe if you want to come along as I learn more about music history and try and share some of the stories I'm hearing. And if you really appreciate this content, what I'm trying to do here, you can become a member using the link in the description below. It's a couple bucks a month. You'll get early access to videos, you'll get your name in the videos, and hopefully we'll be able to do more members only content down the road once we have a few more members. So link in the description if that sounds at all interesting to you. Probably still isn't worth it, but you can decide for yourself. Debbie Gibson was born in Brooklyn in 1970, the third child of Diane, who was an office manager in the medical field. She said that growing up, her father was like her partner in crime. He was a happy-go-lucky guy, and he would sing his kids lullabies when they were going to sleep, so she attributes a lot of her love of singing to him. He also grew up in several different orphanages after his mother abandoned him, and Debbie, whenever she got famous and popular, was able to go back to some of those and perform in his honor. She was also very close with her mother, saying, "We have a great relationship. I mean, I climb into bed every morning and we talk. Not to mention the fact that I don't know how to do laundry, cook, or anything, so I'm just fine living at home." As a kid, Debbie knew pretty early on that she wanted to be a performer when she got older. She started taking piano lessons when she was around 5 years old from Morton Estrin, who was the same guy who taught Billy Joel. She wrote her first song when she was around 6 years old, and in fifth grade, she wrote an opera called Alice in Operaland, which I'm assuming probably wasn't very good, but I wasn't writing operas when I was in fifth grade. I was still trying to figure out how to sign my name in cursive. But Debbie was in the Wings program at her school, which is like an accelerated learning curriculum for gifted students in fourth through sixth grade. So she was a really good student and able to pick up on things pretty quickly. She grew up in Merrick, New York, and stayed there as long as she could. Even later, when she started getting famous, she still attended school and refused a tutor because she said she wanted to be as normal as possible. In my junior year in high school, I was playing in clubs 4 nights a week, and in my senior year, my album sold 3 million copies. I put on a baseball cap and no makeup, and nobody would recognize me. Also, as a kid, she was performing any chance she could get. At 5 years old, she was performing in local community theaters. She became a member of the New York Metropolitan Kids Chorus. She said she was like subscribing to industry magazines and cutting out reminders for auditions and leaving them around for her parents to find, saying like, "Somebody please take me to this." She even joked that she would audition for literally anything she could find. Like if it called for a middle-aged African-American woman, she would still apply and audition because she's like, "That's me, I'll do that." So just loved performing, trying to get out there as much as she possibly could. By the time she was 12, she made herself a DIY studio in her parents' garage after borrowing $10,000 from a relative. And she started working on making music in the little free time that she had outside of school and all of this performing. Her mother also started sending her music to publishers in Canada, and when she was 12, she wrote a song called "I Come From America" and recorded it on like a little cassette. Her mother, Diane, then used the FedEx in her office to mail that recording to a radio station in New York, where she barely got it in on time to meet the competition deadline, but it won $1,000 from the radio station. It won first prize, and it started getting airplay on the radio. That's when her parents started thinking that maybe something could happen with Debbie's singing career. Maybe it wasn't just a kid's hobby. Maybe there was some potential here. So they hired a guy named Doug Breitbart, who was an entertainment lawyer, to be her manager. And Doug had a really unique take on teenage pop music. He saw how most teenage pop stars are just mouthpieces for adults. Adults write and produce the songs, and the kids just sing them, often really not understanding what they're singing at all. But that leaves the music sounding really inauthentic and kind of strange to be talking about like teenage crushes from an adult perspective, but through a teenager. Like it's all just kind of weird blurred lines that Doug thought maybe didn't need to be there. So whenever he was introduced to Debbie, he saw that she could be different. He already saw that she was writing her own music. She was working in her DIY studio. So he taught her how to better arrange and produce and write her own songs. So Debbie started doing it all. She was producing her own work at a very early age. Doug said, I designed a 4-year curriculum for a singer songwriter pop artist and gave her instruction in engineering, programming, arranging, voice lessons. The issue was if I drown her with equipment and know how, she could develop the facility to be a pop star as second nature. It worked. By the time she was 16, she had signed a kind of like developmental singles only deal with Atlantic Records, and Doug self financed the recording of her first single called Only in My Dreams. Then the family got to work. Her dad stuffed letters into his coworkers' mailboxes, suggesting that they listen to the song. Her relatives started calling every club and radio station they could find, asking them to play the song. Debbie said that she knew the song would do well, it just needed that first little push, which her family really helped to give it. The single did so well that Atlantic signed her to make an album and sent her on a promotional tour of clubs where she was chaperoned by her mother because she was too young to get in on her own. Her first album, Out of the Blue, released right around the time that her first single moved out of the dance charts into the top 40 charts, and it set the album up to be super successful. The album eventually hit number 7, and the first 2 singles hit number 4, but the third single, Foolish Beat, hit number 1. That made her the youngest person ever to write, record, and produce a number 1 song. No one has beaten that record yet. By the time she set out on the Out of the Blue tour, she started to hit some snags. Doug and the Gibson family got into a little bit of a rift, so her mother Diane stepped in as her manager and Doug left. Diane knew nothing about the music industry, but she worked tirelessly to educate herself with her daughter's best interest in mind. Debbie wrote about her mother being her manager, saying, throughout the years, Diane educated herself in the ways of publishing and record deals and would sit at conference tables full of record execs in suits who were smugly thinking, oh, it's the mom, we can surely pull a fast one on her. Well, they couldn't. She knew how hard I was working, to the point of panic attacks and fatigue, and by God, she was going to ensure that I was compensated as fairly as any other artist. While her music career was blowing up, she was still in school, graduating with honors in 1988 and begging the DJ not to play any of her music at her high school prom. And then she started working on her second album. I learned in my research that this second album, called Electric Youth, released in 1989, was not as commercially successful as her debut, which is insane because this album was number 1 for 5 weeks and won her the ASCAP Songwriter of the Year award. The first single hit number 1, so thinking about how good that is, it's kind of wild that the first album did even better. None of the follow-up singles outside of the first one kind of hit the charts at all, but still, having a number 1 single, a number 1 album for several weeks, it's really impressive. The major selling point of that first album, at least according to Doug, was that Debbie did it all herself. That was unique. That was special. It's kind of unbelievable that a 16-year-old could write, arrange, produce, engineer an entire album by herself. That was that good. The second album tried to kind of recreate that formula and reinforce that idea that this is a teenager doing it all. But maybe that had already been done, so the public was a little bit less interested in that selling point. Plus, as she gets older and has already done it before, it gets a little less impressive. Like, it's still insanely impressive, but saying that a 16-year-old did this whole album and then the next one's like, yeah, an 18-year-old did this whole album, you're like, well, yeah, but a 16-year-old did that one. So it's just, once it's been done when she's younger, it's less impressive to do it when she's a bit older, even if the album might be a little bit better because she's learned more. But by the time they started working on her third album, they knew they needed a new direction. They couldn't rely on that old selling point. They needed something else. Her empire was also steadily growing. At her height, she said she was employing something like 100 people, but her mom kept her unaware of that, protecting her from the pressure. Instead, Debbie was able to focus on what she loved doing, making music and performing. Her next album, Anything Is Possible, released in 1990, and it was supposed to be her step into being a mature artist. Debbie called on Motown writing legend Lamont Dozier to co-write, and Atlantic sold it as her statement of maturity. But other than some more confident vocals, it did end up sounding pretty similar to the dance pop of her first 2 albums. Only the first single charted, and the album only hit number 41. But this was largely due to the time and the environment. The late 80s teen pop fad was really declining by 1990. Even if it wasn't, Debbie was now 20, so she was moving out of that like acceptable range of 80s pop stars, which is ridiculous. History has proven that it was very hard for those 80s teen stars to transition into adult pop stars, and Debbie was struggling to find where she fit within the entertainment landscape. Things were also kind of dark as she faced the sometimes horror of being a pop star. She had to move out of her hometown of Merrick because of the danger and the attention, and she moved to Manhattan instead, where she could be a little bit more anonymous. She started dealing with stalkers and death threats. She was actually targeted by the guy who killed the actress Rebecca Schaefer. He like had pictures of her and Tiffany and Madonna up on his wall before he shifted his attention to Rebecca. Trying to wrap her 17 and 18-year-old brain around all of that had to have been extremely hard and disconcerting. Debbie said, "It's what happened with young female stars since the beginning of time. The older man thinks, if I can't have you, no one can. They become psychotic. It's a pedophilia thing. It's deep. I remember being on stage and saying to the band, okay, we're in the city where such and such a stalker is. Just to be on the safe side, you're going to see me dance really hard. I'm going to be like a moving target." While working on her fourth and last album with Atlantic called Body, Mind, and Soul, which was released in 1993, Debbie pivoted and joined the cast of Les Mis on Broadway in 1992. She said that being a Broadway star was her very first dream in life, so she felt really happy to make that transition. She was even asked during an interview that now that she's had these successful songs and albums and tours and kind of conquered the pop music world, what else was there for her to achieve? And she said that she wanted to be on Broadway. That was before she was actually on Broadway, so this was just like a culmination of a lifelong dream for her. Richard J. Alexander, who is the producer and director working on casting Les Mis, saw her perform in Anaheim where she sang the song By My Side, which is a song that her character sings in Les Mis, which blew him away. She sang it as the encore and was able to sustain the high notes after putting on a 2-hour concert. So Richard wanted to audition her for the role. She said,
and I remember him saying, okay, well, if you can sustain all those notes after putting on a 2-hour concert, I definitely want to see you for the role. And he still put me through my paces. I sang through the highs and lows of the whole score in his office in New York.
She was cast to perform in February and March, which was a historically downtime in ticket sales for Broadway, so casting her created a whole lot of demand. After her run in Les Mis ended, she headed to London to play Sandy in Grease. She said that she really treasured getting to do that because she felt like she was a part of a first wave of pop stars and movie actors who got casted in theater shows, and that helped introduce the beauty of theater, something that she deeply loved, to a whole new audience of younger kids who maybe hadn't experienced that yet. She went on to star in almost every major Broadway show of the 90s, establishing herself as a theater star. During that time, she signed with EMI and kept releasing albums, but they weren't finding the success of her earlier stuff. Hey, Jax, you're just putting your foot in the air over here? What are you doing, buddy? By 1997, she had left EMI and released her 7th studio album, Deborah, in 1997 on her own label that she started in order to put out her music and presumably give her more control over the sound of it. In 2016, she talked about how she dealt with the pressures and the hardships of the entertainment industry and being a pop star in some pretty unhealthy ways. She said she heard about Prince's unfortunate passing and how that might have been brought on by prescription drug abuse. And unfortunately, she said she could relate. And she said that probably 90% of the entertainment industry could relate. So seeing what happened to Prince inspired her to open up and talk about her own issues with these drugs and these coping mechanisms in order to hopefully inspire younger artists and younger performers to not fall into those same traps. She talked about how just being up and performing at strange hours made it really difficult to function as a person. She said,
I remember being on the road at like 25 touring with theater and doing my own cocktail of Tylenol PM and Xanax. It's like, oh, I found a way to make the Xanax last longer with the Tylenol PM. And I mean, it's as simple as that.
She said that she struggled with panic attacks through most of her career, and this cocktail of prescription drugs was how she coped with it. She said, there's a trait to being young and female in the business and wanting to please. We're called troopers. You're such a trooper, right? Pushing yourself to death's doorstep for the sake of your art. We're conditioned like that. Personally, I think it's great that she's opened up about it. Not that she dealt with it. I hate that for her, but I think it's really important that people who have gone through this open up about it and become advocates for younger performers so they know that they don't have to do this. There's a better way. I just think that's great, and I think more people should do that, honestly. She has continued to release music and be in theater throughout the 2000s, releasing her most recent album in 2022, which was a Christmas album called Winterlicious. She was diagnosed with Lyme disease around 2012, which was a major adjustment that made performing super hard for her, but she's learned how to be diligent and manage her symptoms. She said, "It's kind of day by day, week by week, month by month. Overall, not really good. I went from not even being able to get out of bed and walk to doing 60 concerts this past year." She now lives in Las Vegas with her 3 dogs, at least as of a few years ago, and describes herself as focused, joyous, and free. Unfortunately, her mother Diane did pass away in 2022. Debbie wrote on Instagram, "She was inclusive and unapologetic. She did not care about her reputation as much as she cared about me turning out sane and healthy. She went through all the ups and downs and twists and turns of a true partnership, but our relationship landed at the most loving and lovely juncture." Before she passed away, Diane had retired, but before she did that, she mentored and trained Debbie's current manager, Heather. So in a way, it's kind of like she's still looking after her daughter and looking after her career. Debbie has stayed incredibly busy in her career and seems to be having a great time. She's been a really big advocate, not only for those dealing with Lyme disease, but also for young people in the entertainment industry to be able to have access to mental health care and take care of themselves. She's still out there touring and performing, maybe in shows, so look her up, see what she's up to. She's doing some great work still. And that's the story of Debbie Gibson, how she was able to reinvent herself and kind of find this new life and new career in theater while still making some great music. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like on the video, subscribe if you want to hear more of these stories from music history and want to join me as I learn more about music history, and become a member if you want to really directly support and impact what I do here.